We are 1 day away from the first leg of 2 games that Canada plays against Jamaica in the women's game to qualify for Paris 2024. And gentlemen, earlier this week, I had a chance to speak with head coach Bev Priestman. We touched on a bunch of topics. So I want to play some of those clips, and then I want to get your opinion as we head into 2 very crucial games for the defending Olympic champs who want to get back to the Olympics to be able to do that. And it's not just that they're the defending champs, guys. They've medaled at the last 3 Olympics, which is a pretty incredible feat. For them not to be in Paris would be a huge disappointment. But first things first, and the reason why we talk about this, like, oh my goodness, they could possibly not be there, is because of the performance at the World Cup. So, of course, that was the first thing I asked Bev Priestman. Looking back on New Zealand, Australia, what were your takeaways?
Is hungry, probably hungrier than ever. I think for anyone that has a setback, it has that effect on you, right? That it rots you to your core in many ways, and you spend every day since that moment probably unpicking. But I think what I do know is we need to look forward, and I feel like I've turned the page on that World Cup and looked forward. But I think there's many factors. I think the general sort of consensus, if I had to summarize it and not to unpick every single detail, but I think there wasn't one specific thing. I always think it was a lot of other factors and little factors that all you add them up and it had an effect. I think, you know, you look at yourself in the mirror, you look at tactics, selections, you look at the distractions of the year and the impact that that has on a group. You know, you look at luck, and you don't want to hide behind that as a coach, but you look at some of the injuries, or, you know, your Jessie Fleming, you know, in that Nigeria game and the impact that has. So it's just a lot of little things. I think that there's not one thing, but I think the things that we can control is the bits that we've really put attention on going into this window. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's the story of this team. I felt any subs I made or historically have made have had major impacts. I think that's a given. There's a group of players that have come on and not let this country down ever. And so I think naturally you reflect on, you know, the evolution of this team.
Lots to unpack there, gentlemen. Obviously, they do want to turn the page. She went on to also talk about how each player, she had a debrief with them and went over individually. Also made note that the players, none of them deflected and said, it wasn't my fault. You know, like they all took ownership of what happened. But just based on some of the things that she said there, Ollie, how do you unpack and what is maybe the sense you get from Bev and the team moving forward now?
Yeah, I think it would be convenient if there was just one thing you could point to and say that was the problem and we need to fix that and everything's going to be okay. I think there's probably more to it than that. And like, frankly, at the end of it, I think the way I come out of that World Cup reflecting on it is just that the team hasn't had a good year, and not all of that has been their fault. Obviously, we've known some of the things that have been going on that have been obviously been a distraction, but also, you know, going back to before the World Cup, they haven't performed at the level they're capable of, I think. And the preparation wasn't ideal in that regards. It didn't feel like a team that was going into the tournament fully focused and with full momentum. And then I think the performances reflected that in, you know, in a World Cup where we saw significant improvement from a lot of teams, and the tournament that was no longer just kind of 8 or 9 teams that dominated everyone else. So a little bit of a wake-up call, I think, in that regard. And you know, there's kind of long-term things, I think, for this program to think about and figure out. But obviously, from Bev's point of view, it's just about refocusing the team now on Jamaica.
And that's a quick turnaround too, Jordan. So yeah, refocusing. But I mean, the World Cup, this is probably the fastest turnaround we've ever seen to qualify for an Olympics, like when a World Cup was literally a month and a half ago. But, you know, kind of what do you make of some of the things that Bev said?
Yeah, I think football waits for no one. I know this is such a cliche, but the game is moving. I think we saw this at this last World Cup as well, with just how nations we never really thought would go far had a good tournament. So I think with Canada, I agree with Ollie in terms of Canada not having a great year, but I think also too, going into these next 2 games, I think that level of like gratitude and understand this is an opportunity to go into a situation like this, like 2 games, win, you do your best, you play in the Olympics. Like, this is like an honor, you know. There could still 2 things could be true. There could still be chaos with the federation and things need to be better, but still could be, hey, 23 players, a coach, a coaching staff coming together for your nation and showing out. you're playing at Independence Park against Jamaica in the first leg, but then you come home to sold out BMO. I think something that a lot of players 15, 10, 5 years, even 2 years ago would want, right? A situation where it's one game at home and you get to show out on Canadian soil. So I think just relishing that moment. We could talk about tactics and X's and O's and maybe things that Bev Priestman didn't do well or she didn't get right. But I think also you got to look at the play. And for me, that's something as a foreign player you can control. You can control your effort. It doesn't really matter about tactics. If you have a player you got to take care of as a defender, you take care of them and just throw caution to the wind going forward. But I would just want to see more from this group in terms of seeing them galvanize. We saw Jamaica galvanize. We saw Spain use it in many respects to get that group together and to go out and win a World Cup. I just want to see a bit of that from Canada, a group that is no nonsense and wants to get things done.
No one waves the Canadian flag harder or higher than I. I'm a massive supporter of everything that this country does from an athletic perspective, but honestly, I'm tired of the excuses. When you have a collective group of players who have been around this program and have been winners in the past, I think the onus falls on their shoulders more so than anyone else. The one thing that Bev did say there, which I do believe is true and played a huge role in Canada's failure at the Olympics, is not having their best player fit, and that was Jessie Fleming. I just don't think that there's a like-for-like player in the team, and she's absolutely right about that. Fleming is the player in the midfield, the one player that can drive the team forward and be able to give a little bit more in terms of helping out that front line. When you take Fleming out of that team, that leaves a massive gap there. And what you hope is that Fleming is fit and firing for these upcoming games. These are sorts of things when she speaks about luck, but Fleming is going to be the key player for me for this team. And not having her at full strength in the World Cup, I think left a mark that some other players just simply weren't able to pick up where she left off. That's how good Fleming has been for this program.
Big topic of conversation as well has been goal scoring. And we also know that was a real big struggle, in particular at the World Cup as well. Even in that game against Nigeria, ended in a 0-0 draw. The 2-1 win over Ireland. One was an own goal by Ireland, and then the other goal scored by Adriana Leon. And then we know Australia, it was 4-0. And even before the World Cup, guys, we just kept talking about where the goal is going to come from. And at the CONCACAF Championship, which was the year prior, which was the qualification for both Olympics and World Cup, Canada looked really good against teams that are not ranked that high, and they would score by committee, but then typically will struggle against other nations, in particular higher ranked nations. So I did ask Bev as well if scoring more goals is a big focus for her heading into the Jamaica games.
It's just, where does it come from? And it's probably not from one player. I think that's the bit that we need to get that gel back. I think at the end of 2022, we were, moving forward in that space. And again, that hard reset of, yes, what this 2023 looked like for us in terms of preparation for a World Cup was very, very difficult. We lost our flow from what we had in 2022, but we have to reset, and we now have something that's really dear to this group's heart, and that's an Olympic Games on the line. And ultimately, I hate to say it, but we've been the team of bounce backs from probably, you think of 2012, 2016, 2020 or 2021, it was off the back of probably disappointments of World Cups, and I thought we were going to change that. We didn't, but we know what's on the line, and I think that's enough to get this group hungry and ready to go. I think, like, full accountability, I'll be honest, in every phone call I've met with every single player, there wasn't a lot of deflecting and a lot of sort of blaming, and what I got from my group is a lot of self-reflection and focus, to be honest. So that's really, when you talk about what do you feel, I genuinely feel that the group are going to come in hungry, and ultimately, there's no way any of us wanted that happened in the World Cup. But I think absolutely there's been deep reflection, but not deep where I feel like it's going to run into the camp. I think we've had the conversation. I took the 23 reflections from every player. I presented some themes to the group and an action plan of, right, this is what this camp is about. And I think ultimately we have to come in and take away that hangover because I think that's what it can be. If you're not careful, it can run into this window. I mean, that's basically what we're aiming to do, is to come in and use that hunger and desire, the same hunger and desire when I took over, you know, in that short Olympic campaign that I had when I first got the job.
So the date she's referring to, as we know, 2011 World Cup was an absolute disaster for the Canadians, finishing at the bottom of the table. We know John Herdman came in, took over the program. They go and get an Olympic bronze in 2012. 2015, they did make it to the quarterfinals, but of course that was a home World Cup. They would have loved to have gone farther. Of course, they would have loved to have finished top 3, if not win it all. So that was huge disappointment for them. They go to Rio and get a bronze, even though they wanted a different color then. And then, of course, in 2019, out in the round of 16, they go and get gold. So that's the bounce back that I think Bev Priestman is trying to draw from. World Cups don't go well, but then you bounce back when it comes to the Olympics. Now, Ollie, she had also at some point had mentioned the identity of this team is defense. And I don't know if we can necessarily dispute that. I mean, we all say that's how they won Olympic gold in Tokyo. They were so defensively sound. And in particular, Steph Labbe, the goalkeeper, the main defender of all. But did you get a sense that Bev was a little bit concerned about scoring or not?
Well, firstly, just to address the first comment, like, I get that Bev is going to use the World Cup as motivation and wants to bounce back, but I would rather not be the bounce back team, to be honest. I'd rather just start performing at a World Cup, and like, the worry there is it's getting worse, not better, right? Like, since 2015, it's kind of been gradually declining to worse and worse World Cup performances, and it's a concern. That for me is like your primary competition as a national team. The Olympics is great; those medals are fantastic, and you know, memories that everyone who supports this team will cherish, but the World Cup is the big one for me. So I would love to get out of that cycle at some point of being the team that bounces back with a great Olympics after a disappointing World Cup. In terms of the attack, like, I think obviously they need to score more goals, particularly against the top teams. I do think a lot of it is going to come from them rediscovering what they are best at, though, which is having that strong defensive identity. Like, that impacts how you attack, you know, where you're winning the ball, the confidence you have in the players behind you to go forwards. And I thought a lot of that was lost at the World Cup. Like, they looked like at times an open team, a vulnerable team, a team that had lost some of the clarity that they'd had in previous years in terms of how they defend and how they play without the ball. So for me, it's not so much about, like, I want to see a more attacking Canada side. I just want to see a Canada side that has a clear idea of what they're doing and what their identity is. And if they have that, then I think they'll be okay in these games.
Jordo?
Yeah, I think watching this national team, that they have attacking options, but I just think the question mark is who is going to be the attacking threat or threats on the day. The 3 games in the World Cup didn't really seem like there was that player or players to really, this is a standout player for the day and they're going to get things done. So I'm hoping for these 2 matches that some of the attacking options that Canada has, they play their best football. I will say, when I'm listening to Bev speak, I have to respectfully disagree in terms of scoring is not the issue. I think not scoring goals change the dynamics of games. Like, for me as a defender, we can also talk about this, Wheels. If we just go quickly to the CPL, you mentioned that 2-month drought that York United had last season. There were games where we had so many chances to go and score, but you didn't, and you're frustrated. The other team gains confidence. They could smell that, hey, you've done your best, but you're still not scoring. I think that happens with Canada. I think that their game plan, they go out, yeah, maybe they've started in second gear the past 3 games in the World Cup, but they go out, they put their best foot forward, and then they're not scoring. And then other teams are like, well, that's the best that they've done. They're still not getting the attack going. And then they fall to goals or they're deficient in the back line. But they start defensively sound, cool. But it's just like, if you know that your best foot is going forward and you're not scoring, then that's the issue. It changes the game. So I would say, yeah, both things can be true. But if you start scoring goals, I really think this Canadian side could defend well and really close out games. But the fact that you're not scoring, it just leaves that door open for teams to come and exploit you.
This team was able to mask some of its flaws or shortcomings over the course of the last decade plus, having the greatest international goal scorer all time on your team. Christine Sinclair was a wonderful outlet to have when you need a goal in a game or to put you in a leading position where then you can go on and hold on to your lead. The fact that you had a transformational player like Sinclair in her prime was a very good thing for Canada. Who is that player that is able to step up and maybe even produce at half a Sinclair level? There's no one in the team. They've scored 5 goals this calendar year so far, and there's been 4 different goal scorers and an own goal. That's it. And go back over the last 2-3 years in this program. Adriana Leon and Jessie Fleming, and Fleming's been from penalties all different ways, have been your 2 goal scorers for this women's national team. You know, where are the rest of the goals coming from in this team? There's some real questions. And that's why Bev, I think, needs to focus on the defensive shape and form much more because she simply doesn't have the personnel in that department. And when it comes to defensive shape, like, look, it's one thing setting up your team in a block, what Bev called what was at the World Cup, but you need the personnel, you need the mentality. And I just don't feel like that mentality is there right now. I'd love to know what's going on in this Canada camp and where the leadership is emerging, because oftentimes it comes down to nothing but determination, wanting it more than your opponent. They had such a good core of Sinclair and Schmidt and Scott and Janine Becky in the past. And now you just kind of have Sinclair there in this camp. Are you going to really rely on Sinclair, who's not a 90-minute player any longer, to be that one player that pulls you through? I don't think that can be the case. So where are these leaders in this team? Where is that mentality coming from? How does that manifest itself? These are things that I think have yet to be answered with this new version of this Canadian women's national team. It's not the team that we saw over the last decade or so. It's a much different group. And thus far, the results have been underwhelming, to say the least.
Well, we'll see if Bev makes any kind of lineup changes, personnel, if it's a different starting 11, if it's a different kind of formation. As we know, there's already been some players who have had to leave camp, Deanne Rose and Jade Revere, due to injury. So how does that affect things moving forward? You mentioned Janine Becky. I had also said this earlier. You can't underestimate just how much of a loss she has been to this team as she continues to recover from ACL surgery. So those games can be seen right here on One Soccer. Canada versus Jamaica, September 22nd, and then September 26th, it'll be at BMO Field in Toronto. You mentioned it's a sold-out crowd. So hopefully the Canadians will feel motivated by that.